Something that some of you already know is that Is Love originally started out as a food business. A few years ago, I started making a simple but extremely delicious nut butter that I started taking to work. More than a few people I shared it with told me I should sell the stuff, and if I did, they would be eager customers. So I got all the licensing, had the logo made, rented a commercial kitchen and a space at the nearby farmers markets, and started selling it under the name of Magic Butter. And Magic Butter was a hit. I literally couldn't make enough of it to keep up with demand. So as I started planning for my second season, figuring out how to increase production and getting ready to hire some people to help out, things were looking pretty great. Except it was January 2020, and there was a story in the news about a virus going around East Asia that at least one reporter was calling COVID-19. Well, you can probably guess the rest. There was no way I could keep moving forward that year, so I had to shutter the whole thing and I locked down with the rest of the world. Then one day in 2021, I was talking to my wife about my plans for the upcoming market season that year, and she told me that she'd had something like a vision that Eat is Love, instead of being a food business, should be a YouTube channel. I immediately knew that she was right, so I switched gears and changed plans, and well, I suppose if you're watching this channel, you know the rest. And when I announced to friends that I was transforming Eat is Love into a YouTube show, I promised that in one of my episodes I was going to demonstrate the original magic butter recipe. Well, today is that magic day where I'm going to show you how to make the magic. But be forewarned, this is like the simplest recipe you've ever seen. Literally, the hardest part is washing the dishes. I'm going to be almost embarrassed to show this to you because you're going to be like, what, that's it? Especially if you were one of my customers, you're going to be, that's all it is? Well, all I can tell you is that sometimes the simplest recipes are the tastiest. I mean, the best beer is only 4 ingredients, and one of those is water, right? Well, this, as it turns out, is also just 4 ingredients, and you don't even have to ferment it. So this is going to be my shortest video ever, even with this blah, blah, blah at the beginning here. So enough of said blah, 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 and on to the magic. Let's get to it, Pruitt. The original Eat is Love Magic Butter recipe. If you're lucky enough to have tasted it before, then you know what you're in for. If you haven't had it before, you're about to experience pure magic. Okay, talk about a short ingredient list. This is it. Starting with our main player, the cashews. If you want your nut butter to be a little creamier, a little sweeter, you can increase the cashew ratio. The pecans, on the other hand, will make the nut butter taste a little bit drier. It's kind of a nice woody flavor. It's kind of fibery in texture. And in both cases, if you can get pieces instead of whole nuts, you might save a little money. I mean, you're just going to grind them up anyway. Next on the list is cacao. Some people don't like the cacao. It's crunchy. It has a bitter flavor. I just love it. I can't imagine not liking it. But it is a sacred food to many indigenous cultures, so be aware of that. I think it's an incredibly healthy food, and I love the crunchiness. I love the bitterness, so I would never skip the cacao, but some people do. Now, the salt, I use Redmond brand. It's an ancient sea salt from Utah. It has a kind of a gritty texture. I love this stuff. It tastes like the desert. Every time that I've had to make nut butter with a different kind of salt, I've really missed this. I'm not getting paid. They don't even know who I am. But Redmond ancient sea salt is the way to go if you can get it. Another very optional ingredient that I actually don't use anymore is avocado oil. Just a splash, like maybe a half tablespoon, which will result in a thinner, runnier end product. Some of the first people I made this for were long-distance trail runners who wanted to put this in go tubes, so they wanted it to be a little thin and runny. The downside of that is that thinner nut butter will fall off of fruit slices and seep through the holes of breads that have an open crumb. So for me, I like a thicker, pastier butter these days. It doesn't impact the flavor all that much, so it's really just a preference thing. If you have a good quality food processor like this Waring, that might be a plus. Another company called Roku also makes a really high quality professional food processor. Of course, my first few batches, all I had was regular old Cuisinart, and it worked fine. Step 1 is measure out your ingredients. Start with 227 grams of cashews. Then zero out your scale and put 170 grams of pecans in the same bowl. In a separate bowl, weigh out 37 grams of raw cacao nibs. You might find them sold as cocoa pieces or cacao pieces, same diff. Pour the nuts into the food processor and let her rip. You'll notice that it goes through a few different stages. First, it'll turn into like a powder. That powder will start collecting up the sides. If you want, you can stop the processor and sort of lightly scrape off the sides. If you skip this step, it'll take care of itself eventually, but this is a little faster. After a while, the powdered nuts will start releasing their oils and little clumps will start to form. The little clumps will become bigger clumps, and at some point, the whole thing just turns into one big ball mass rolling around the carafe. Kind of fun to watch, but don't interfere. Just let it do its thing. You might notice that it gets a bit warm. That's fine. Next, it'll turn into a paste. From here, it's kind of a matter of preference. The longer it goes, it'll get thinner, but also sweeter. For the purposes of this video, I left it in a pretty pasty stage, but usually I let it go longer. I tend to prefer the sweetness that comes with a thinner consistency. Now, when you get it just about to where you like it, add about a teaspoon of kosher sea salt, followed by the cacao. Don't let it go too long here, just about 5 seconds. If you let it run too long in this stage, the cacao will get finer and less crunchy. Of course, if you like it that way, that's your prerogative. And congratulations, you have just made about 1 pint of delicious magic butter. Carefully remove the blade and set it somewhere safe where it won't make a mess. Make sure to scrape it off a little. Now pour the magic into a container. The more you scrape now, the less you'll have to clean later, so try to be thorough. And speaking of cleanup, it's literally the hardest step in the whole process. And that's it, the original magic butter. It's so simple, it's almost embarrassing. But like I said, sometimes the most delicious things are the simplest. My favorite way to have it is on fruit, which is just about as perfect a recovery food as I've ever found. It's also great on sourdough toast or oatmeal, and honestly, half the time, I just eat it by the spoonful. I hope you enjoy it. But thanks so much for watching. Hope to see you next time. Ciao.